The first part is go ahead and look at the camera and introduce yourself. We're going to do first name, last name. Tell me the school you're at, the grade you taught, and the lesson, what topic you were teaching.
Okay.
Go ahead.
My name is Donna Burns. I'm at Bethel Middle School in Bethel, Connecticut. The lesson that I taught was on making inferences and author's craft in regards to the signing of the Constitution, the famous painting by Christie. It's actually called The Scene at the Signing of the Constitution of the United States.
Good. Tell me to pause at any time. Okay, so first question. We want to understand the decisions you made in planning for this lesson and how it fits into the unit in the year. First question. How does this lesson connect to and build on students' prior skills and knowledge? What was taught? You know what? I have the wrong questions. Cut! All right, continuing on. Okay, so we want to understand the decisions you made in planning for this lesson and how it fits into the unit in the year. How does this lesson connect to and build on students' prior skills and knowledge? What was taught before the lesson and what will come after it?
Students have just gotten, I can't do this part. All right, students have just finished a unit on the American Revolution, and they looked at the influence of the Declaration of Independence. So they had the opportunity to take a look at another very famous historical document. And that led us into looking at the events that led up to the development of a constitution. And students had the opportunity to take a look at the Constitution and annotate the document and look at the compromises that were made in developing the Constitution, as well as some of the key concepts that are highlighted within the Constitution, including the concept of federalism. And the students then are pulling from that information in the Constitution as they move forward in this lesson and try to determine whether this painting truly reflects the ideals of the Constitution and the people that were at the Constitutional Convention in 1787.
Great. Is the text used in this lesson part of a sequence of texts designed to build skills and knowledge? If so, please give an example of other texts that form the sequence.
So the students looked at the Declaration of Independence. They also looked at biographies of the different delegates that were present at the scene of the signing at the Constitutional Convention. And students looked at these two texts with a very critical eye. They were looking for ways in which the relationships that the colonists had and the early Americans had with the king and the British Parliament, how that impacted the development of these two documents, and how the Americans included these safeguards to make sure that the same events couldn't happen again as they move forward into developing their own nation.
Talk about the standards targeted in this lesson. What did you do to make the lesson reflect the full intent of that standard?
So I really addressed three standards within this lesson. I wanted students to look at author's craft, and I wanted them to determine what ways the author manipulates and utilizes his craft in order to portray a message to the viewer. So the students prior to this lesson looked at different techniques that an artist can use. And we've been going back and forth talking about how an artist is an author when it comes to painting. So we...
Attention please, would Asher Imran please come to the office? Asher Imran to the office.
Do you know where to pick it up from? Or do you want to start over on that one?
I'll start over.
Okay, I'll read you the question, sorry. Okay, so talk about the standards targeted in this lesson. What did you do to make the lesson reflect the full intent of that standard?
Okay, so I focused this lesson on three different standards. I asked students to cite specific textual evidence that supports an analysis of a perspective. Never mind. Hold on. This is the worst part ever.
Question again. Okay, So talk about the standards targeted in the lesson. What did you do to make the lesson reflect the full intent of that standard?
Okay. So I focused on 3 standards in this lesson. I wanted students to cite specific evidence to support an analysis of a primary and secondary source. What I did is I had students take a look at, oh my God, I can't. This is terrible, I'm
Do you want
sorry.
to pass on this question?
No, I could do it.
Okay.
I can't focus on, all right.
Tell me when you're ready. Okay.
So for this lesson, I wanted students to look at author's craft. I also wanted them to be able to cite evidence to support a perspective and to determine what the author's message in a text is. So what I did is ask students to come up with different ways in which an artist uses techniques to send a message to a viewer. And students developed a list of those techniques. And then what they did is they went and they determined those techniques they saw within the image. So the use of light versus dark, contrasting colors. And then they had to determine what the message of that was. Why is it that the author, or the artist in this case, would make one individual in a spotlight versus another in the dark? And what message is that trying to portray to the viewer of this painting? I wanted students to cite specific textual evidence, so I gave them multiple resources that they can go to find evidence to support the inferences that they were making and drawing on the observations they made. For instance, the students were looking at George Washington and noticing that he was standing on a stage. And some of the inferences they made were that he was very important, that he was being highlighted as being the hero of the American Revolution and the Constitutional Convention. And then they needed to find text from their resource to support that. They also went through a series of activities leading up to this where they had to utilize text evidence to support a claim that they formulated on various topics. So this isn't something that we just started doing, it's something that we've been building up to throughout the course of the year so far.
Good. Which of the core action indicators do you think this lesson best exemplifies and why?
Okay. I think that really this lesson is focusing around core action 1 and core action 2. I think that the lesson itself couldn't go as smoothly if I didn't pick a really good text to send for the students to really focus on throughout the entire activity. Picking a painting, sometimes that can be confusing to kids, determining that as text, but we keep going back to the concept that there's multiple ways that we can interpret the word text. It's not just a painting, it could be a video, it could be a graph. And so the picking of that particular painting really helps students to look at the ideas of compromise, to look at the contribution of the delegates and the importance of the different characters that are portrayed. Now my questioning, which is core action 2, helps the students to really be able to pick out what the message is that the author is trying to portray. I formulated several questions that got students to think about what it is the artist was thinking when he made this painting, what view he takes on the concepts of federalism and the concepts of democracy, as well as having the students even formulate their own questions, which I did throughout the activity, picking out questions that they needed answers to, and then posing them to other students who then had to look to their own text to find the answer to those questions. So really, core action 1 and core action 2 are the 2 areas that I focus most on for this particular lesson.
We're interested in how the shifts required by the CCSS are being incorporated into your instruction. Discuss how this lesson illustrates the shifts required by the CCSS.
So this This lesson, hold on. This lesson incorporates the shifts of the CCSS in multiple ways. I mean, there's a little bit of all the shifts in this lesson in some way, shape, or form. The idea of having students use specific vocabulary that has to do with author's craft, the asking students to relate all of their findings and their observations to some sort of text that supports or refutes their inferences. Also, we are asking students to really build a rich understanding about the Constitution, not like we used to by having students read the textbook about the Constitution, but having them look at a painting that could be interpreted in multiple ways, and then using additional text resources to determine the meaning of that painting. So they now have to go ahead and build their own understanding rather than getting a paper that's placed in front of them that has the answers. I'm asking students to take risks, to look at what's there and to make an inference. It doesn't have to be right, but you need to be able to look then at text and decide, can I support that inference I made, or does the text tell me that my inference was not based on fact?
How did you teach the content of this lesson prior to the CCSS? What is the same and what's different?
I didn't teach this content prior.
You can say that.
Okay, I can say that?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, the last couple of sorry, hold on.
Do you want me to read it again?
Prior to last year, I taught 6th grade, so I was not dealing with the content of American history. I taught ancient civilizations, so I never really taught this particular lesson before, but I could speak to how I addressed certain lessons that were...
Ms. Antonucci, please call the main office.
So I could speak to how I taught lessons prior to the CCSS that are similar to the content here. I have to say that for a very long time I utilize a lot of visual images. I've used primary sources. It's sort of embedded within the content of social studies. It is really what we go to bring history alive for students. So I think I have an advantage that the type of content that I teach really thrives off of the use of these resources. But I mean, we did go to textbooks, we did go to different informational resources, and we gave students answers. And now that's not happening anymore. Students are the ones who need to determine the answer to all of their questions. They need to take those risks. And if they don't know the answer to it, no more do teachers answer the question. Teachers pose another question to the students and ask them to go and find the answer, go research, and come back with a better understanding of the question that they themselves posed.
Student engagement is crucial to the work of the CCSS, and we want to understand how you ensured that all students had the opportunity to productively engage in the work of the lesson. How did you support all students working with grade level text? For example, how did you provide scaffolding for students below grade level so they can read at grade level text?
Okay. For this activity, I incorporated different types of text. Leading up to today's lesson, students were given the Constitution in its actual form, and some students who have difficulty with the grade level text were given, well, it's not even grade level text. Some students that had difficulty with the Constitution were offered other resources to help them understand the meaning of these words so that they can really get a good understanding of the ideals that come out of this document that started our nation and developed our government system. Students were given, some students were given a side-by-side, where on one side it had the text of the Constitution, on the other side it had an interpretation of what it meant in common language that we would use every day. I also had another version of the Constitution that just had a sentence or so, and it gave the main idea of each of the sections and the articles of the Constitution, as well as just a general understanding of what each of the amendments were about. So I gave different text for the students for that portion of the lesson. As far as the painting goes, I think it really offered for all students to look at that piece of text and to interpret what it meant. Our visual learners really come out and shine in an activity such as this, and I paired it with a text, so the text was appropriate at grade level, but I also grouped students based on their reading levels from a past assessment. So it gave me the opportunity, based on their reading groups, to then go and spend more time with the students that needed my support when they were reading through their documents. It also gave me an opportunity to go and assist those students in pulling out some of the most important text as they were annotating their document as well.
And what did you do for students that can read at grade level text? Or, I'm sorry. And how did you create opportunities for students who are more advanced to engage more deeply with grade level?
How did I do that? I mean, they got the regular reading passage, right? They had the Constitution, which is a really high reading level. They didn't get the interpretation of it. They had the actual document. So would I just say that?
Yeah. If that's the first thing that comes to your mind.
Okay. The students who had...
You want me to read it
Yes.
again? How did you create opportunities for students who are advanced to engage more deeply with grade level or above grade level text?
The students that were advanced in reading and could handle the Constitution in its original form with the challenging vocabulary were given that document without a vocabulary list to go along with it. They utilized their technology as well as their dictionaries to look up any word that they needed to. They also were paired. When I was doing the initial reading of the Constitution, I had the students in the reading groups based on past reading score assessments, and it gave me the opportunity to put those that really needed to be excelled in one group, and they were even posing questions about what they were reading, so they were taking their reading to the next level.
How do you know that the students were able to successfully respond to the text-dependent questions and tasks with precision? Did the students acquire the literary skills addressed in this lesson?
Did they acquire the literary skills addressed in the lesson? Okay. I could tell that students were able to answer my text-dependent questions because of the evidence that really was displayed in the activity today. I saw students going to the text and saying, I wonder why this is happening here. And then they were able to go to their readings on the delegates and find evidence that supported their observations in the painting. They were able to utilize pieces of the painting as evidence too. So they were saying, I already know that George Washington played a very important role at the Constitutional Convention and in early American history. The evidence from this painting that shows me that the author or the artist also felt the same way is A, B, and C. So I really saw them able to rise to that challenge of utilizing text evidence to support the questions that I posed for them throughout the lesson.
Which behaviors from Core Action 3 did the students best exemplify in this lesson, and what actions have you taken as a teacher to make that happen?
Okay. I really felt that the students in this lesson displayed a lot of the items expressed in the Core Action 3. They were able to find a lot of evidence to support their ideas as they were discussing within their groups. I also noticed that they were able to have conversations with one another about what the meaning of that evidence was. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
So,
So which behaviors from core action 3 did the students best exemplify in this lesson?
oh, so the illustrate the student behaviors. Sorry. Okay. Students used behaviors from core action 3 in this lesson. Some of them include the ability to build off of the ideas of each other, to actually use text-based evidence to support their ideas with text-based evidence. I think we got to this point because we've been doing a lot of practice with this. We've been looking at different paintings. Prior to this lesson, I actually showed them a couple paintings that had political messages that were relevant to this time period, and they had to interpret why President Obama was portrayed in a certain way, and they needed to support their ideas with evidence. They needed to go to one another and to build off of the ideas of other students. We also practice the use of academic conversation rubrics, and students, part of that rubric is that students have to build off the ideas of others. Students are assessed on this, so I think that's why we're at this point where students are really listening to one another and building off those ideas. Do we have work? Yes, we have work in this area to continue, but it's nice to see that what I'm doing to further along conversation is actually assisting them. I'm probing them with multiple questions that ask them to really think deeply, to go to text and to pull out specific information from text to support their answers. And then I'm noticing in turn that they're doing the same thing to each other and asking each other to support ideas and not being satisfied with a simple statement. They want support to back up their statements now, which is nice to see.
Great instructors are continuously learning. We want to understand how you celebrated this lesson and what you would improve upon. Reflecting on the lesson, what worked particularly well and what might you do differently?
Okay. I went back and forth with this lesson as to how exactly I wanted to structure it. I wanted to give each student a crucial role in the lesson. So that's why I assigned each one a delegate and made them really the master of that particular delegate. They needed to know information about that person. And then they were grouped with students that were also seated in a segment of the painting similar to themselves. And they needed to understand why their individual was pictured in the way that he was, and then utilizing the key vocabulary of author's craft as well as picking out text evidence to support their ideas. They needed to formulate a conclusion, and they will be doing this as we move forward. They need to determine what the artist's message is. And what I noticed is, though they were able to bring certain information about their individual and draw conclusions about other individuals based on what they knew about theirs, it might have been better for them to have more information about either all the delegates so that they could understand everyone. And time doesn't always allow that, but maybe even just picking one segment of this picture in the future and having all the students focus in on those 4 or 5 individuals and that segment, and determining why the people are pictured in that particular segment and how they are different than some of the other individuals who maybe are less prominent. So it might be more about the format of the lesson versus the selection of the text. I'm really happy with the use of the painting to bring together all of the students' ideas and to determine the message of the Constitution and the key ideal of federalism. I'm just would like to try.
Is that it?
That was it.
Oh,
I think I'm basically done with that. So.
that quick. Okay, last question.
Okay.
This one's an easy one. Were there any surprises or unexpected student behaviors or reactions today?
It's interesting when you put a camera on what happens. Some of the kids that typically didn't participate as much in class were participating more, and then there were some that typically participated less. So, that's interesting when you see what happens when a camera's on the students. Also, I noticed that while most of the students were very much on task, there were a couple that were a little bit off task, and when I went with close proximity to that student, they started to change those behaviors. But I really was impressed with the level of conversation that was occurring when I wasn't present at the table. I see that happening very often. There tends to be one or two leaders that I place within each of the groups that help to facilitate the conversation, and that is a strategy that I think teachers use. We can't be in every single group, so we do need some support, and it's a great way for us to challenge some of those students who really excel and could continue to build those leadership qualities.
Yay, you're done.
I survived.